Dad, who is that?" As I tentatively confirmed, my father, wrapping his hand around Sarah's shoulder, and happily said, "This person is my new wife, and Kristen's new mom. Nice to meet you." So, that was his intention. I only have one mom. I won't accept her. Then you will have to leave. The father continued with a grin. Live with the new mom. If you hate it, leave. Okay. My straightforward response surprised both Dad and Sarah. They probably never expected such an answer. Then, I'll prepare to leave. The rest is up to you two. Saying this to my stunned father and Sarah, I returned to my room to pack. Well then, thank you for everything. Oh, from now on, we are strangers. I won't know anything that happens to you. A month later, I received a call from my father. "Kristen, help me. I don't have a father, remember? My name is Kristen. A 15-year-old junior high school senior year student. Born as the only daughter to my parents, I have always been cherished and loved. I thought there couldn't be a happier child than me. However, it seems that was not the case. I came to realize this clearly in my 6th year of elementary school. Are you Kristen?" One day, as I was leaving school, a flashy woman was waiting at the gate and called out to me. I couldn't respond right away. There are 5 words I learned from my teacher right after entering elementary school. Don't go, don't ride, shout, run away immediately, inform. These words were taught as the first thing to remember in order to protect oneself. I memorized them right after learning them. Oh, did I scare you? It's okay, I'm a friend of Kristen's dad. The woman, with her flashy blonde hair styled in a voluminous way, wearing large sunglasses and flashy clothes, said this with a smirk. But by that time, I already knew. Adults who say they are okay, are often not okay. I've seen it in dramas, where kidnappers say that to kidnap children. I know you are Kristen. Look. The woman rummaged through her flamboyantly decorated bag, pulling out an equally decorated smartphone. Her nails, holding the smartphone, were so long I wondered how she could live with them, and they were heavily decorated. Look. She showed me a photo of myself on her smartphone. It was a picture taken with my parents at a church during my first communion. The same photo as my kid's mobile phone wallpaper. Why does this woman have it? Surprised, I became even more unable to respond. Wondering why I have this? It's not strange at all. Your dad gave it to me. Sarah, with a delighted laugh, tucked her smartphone back into her bag. My name is Sarah. Sorry to bother you, but could you tell your mom to hurry up and give me your dad? After saying just that, the woman who introduced herself as Sarah quickly disappeared. I was already in 6th grade, vaguely understanding what she meant. However, I didn't know what to do in such a situation. Returning home dumbfounded, I decided to say nothing upon seeing my mother's face greeting me with a welcome back. Probably, I couldn't say anything, to be honest. Since then, I continued living as usual, at least on the surface. Because my father seemed as usual. Kind and family-oriented. Handsome with a tall and slender figure, as one would expect from a former actor hopeful. I've always been proud of my dad. Yet, there remained a lump in my heart. Small, hard, cold, and heavy. No matter what I did, I was always conscious of that lump. Without saying anything, I graduated from elementary school and became a middle school student. My parents, acting as if nothing had happened, attended the entrance ceremony as normal parents, and took photos in front of the middle school's main gate, as if promised. Me, wearing a school uniform with a white flower corsage on my chest. My parents, in suits, stood on both sides. To anyone looking, we were nothing but a normal, happy family. But maybe that wasn't the truth. Thank you. While I was lost in thought, my father's voice brought me back to reality. He thanked the person who took our photo, then came back and showed us the screen. Would he give this photo to that woman named Sarah too? What's wrong? No, nothing. My mother, seeing me looking strangely at the photo, asked with concern. I looked at her, then at my father, thinking. I absolutely couldn't let my mother know. Even if, indeed, my father had that kind of relationship with the woman named Sarah. It would be okay, as long as my mother didn't know. I couldn't say anything for that reason. To act as if I didn't know, as if it never happened. Besides, it might have been a lie. Maybe that woman named Sarah just had a crush on my cool dad. And said something mean like that. Maybe she just happened to get that photo and showed it to me as a prank or harassment. I hadn't discarded that possibility yet. No, rather, I hoped it was the case. Thus, keeping silent as time passed, I entered middle school, and soon after, my mother fell ill. The diagnosis revealed a serious illness. One that would end her life in the near future, as they said. That's a lie, right? My mother told me the truth herself. No, it's not a lie. Mom won't be able to stay with Kristen for much longer. My mother said this with a weak smile. And so, there's something I want to tell Kristen.
Yeah.
What is it? After I'm gone, Kristen might have a hard time. To ensure you can live on your own, I will do everything possible. My mother clearly said, so you can live on your own. That implies not together with father, not just the two of us. Maybe she knew. I thought so, but somehow, I couldn't ask. My mother, too, probably thinking I knew, chose not to mention it explicitly. That's how it seemed. When the time comes, there might be things you find unpleasant. But I want you to trust that everything Mom did was for you. Okay, I understand. I responded with just that. I love you, honey, remember that. My mother said this happily and hugged me tightly. After that, neither of us said anything more. And we lived as if nothing had happened, just the three of us, as before. The only difference was that, over time, my mother gradually grew weaker. She went in and out of the hospital until she couldn't return anymore. That was all. When my mother weakened, my father devoted himself to her. When she was hospitalized, he would visit right after work. When at home, he would come back early to cook and take care of the house. Dad will take care of the house, so Kristen, please stay by Mom's side. To anyone looking, a perfect husband and father. Yet, in his words and expressions, I felt something artificial. I made soup, how's the taste? Yes, it's very delicious. You're always a great cook, honey. I can't beat Mom's cooking. Get well soon and cook us some delicious meals again. Playing the roles of husband and wife as if reading from a script. I, too, beside them, pretended to be a daughter, directing a fake smile at them. I wonder why. Why could I tell it was an act? Probably, my mother could too. As my father continued the charade, my mother and I played along. It felt like that. Just spending the last days left to my mother peacefully, as if nothing was wrong. That's all we were doing, just passing the time in a family play. About 2 years later, when I was in the 3rd year of middle school, my mother passed away. The pain and sorrow of losing a parent are something only those who have experienced it can understand. At the funeral, my father perfectly played the role of a bereaved husband. He cried just like me, but those tears felt hollow. The attendees were crying too, but I was just watching my father's performance, thinking how impressive it was. After the wake and the funeral, I was left alone. The people who attended told me to hang in there with my father. But I had a promise with my mother. From now on, I had to strive on my own. As expected, my father hardly came home anymore. You are big enough to be okay, on your own. Sorry, I'm so busy with work. Saying that, my father left the house, and I spent most of my time alone. I was prepared for it, but honestly, it was tough. I had thought that maybe, just maybe, after losing my mother, he would think a bit more about his daughter. I really wanted someone to be there for me. But there's no use thinking that way. At 15, you're both an adult and a child. And so, I got used to the lonely days. And the day after the month since my mother's passing, an incident happened. It was a Saturday. I was alone at home since it was a school holiday, but it started getting noisy outside the house. First, take out all the unnecessary stuff. After cleaning up, bring in the stuff from over here. My father was loudly directing many people. What's going on? What about Mom's things? To my surprise, people entering our house started to take my mother's belongings. No. Don't take those away. I stood at the entrance, blocking the people trying to take the stuff away. They were probably movers. They all looked troubled at me. The movers were just doing the job they were asked to do. I knew that, but who asked them to do this job? Dad. Why are you taking Mom's things? Mom's gone, and we need to move on. So, no one will use those tools anymore. That's why they are being taken away. I blocked the entrance again, ensuring nothing could be taken out. No. What are you planning to do with them? Things that can be sold will be sold, and the rest will be disposed of. My father said this almost happily. Don't take them away. Those are Mom's dowry. My mother's parents, my grandparents, were wealthy. And the dowry they provided was of very good quality. What the movers were trying to take away now was my mother's dowry. The movers, hearing my words, looked at each other, troubled. This dowry was made by a craftsman for Mom when she was a child. For when she would get married. It's very important. Wow, that sounds precious. As I was desperately arguing, such a voice came from behind me. Fine, then I'll use it. It was Sarah. She pushed past me into the entrance, looking over my mother's dowry. Don't know what this is about, but it's an antique, right? I'll use it, so put it back. Hey, put it back. Despite my pleading, they didn't stop, but when Sarah said so, my father had the movers return my mother's belongings. Dad, who is that? As I reluctantly confirmed, my father, wrapping his arm around Sarah's shoulder, happily said, This person is my new wife, meaning your new mom, Kristen. Nice to meet you. So that was his intention. I only have one mom. I won't accept such a person. Then you will have to leave. The father continued with a smirk. You are still a child. If you don't listen to Dad, how can you live on your own? This is mine and Mom's house. Kick that woman out. So mean, telling me to leave. Sarah pretended to cry as if she was deeply hurt. Apologize to Mom. Then we can live here together. Don't let that woman into our house. I absolutely refuse to live with her. Look what she's saying. What are we going to do, darling? Sarah leaned on my father, who looked all too pleased. Well, if you really hate it that much, you have to leave. Dad. My father said something unbelievable. Live with the new mom. If you hate it, leave. Okay. My straightforward response surprised both my father and Sarah. They probably never expected such an answer. Then, I'll prepare to leave. The rest is up to you two. Saying this to my stunned father and Sarah, I went back to my room to pack. Not much was left in my room that was important. I had moved most of my belongings to a certain place beforehand. My father never entered my room, so he seemed completely unaware. I quickly packed my school stuff and daily necessities. Well then, thank you for everything. Oh, from now on, we are strangers. I won't know anything that happens to you. Ignoring my father and Sarah, I stepped outside the house. The taxi I had called arrived promptly, so I got in and told the driver where to go.
Goodbye,
Dad. It turned out just like Mom said it would. I murmured softly from the back seat of the taxi. I arrived at a large house in the suburbs, my grandparents' home. Kristen, you did well. My grandparents greeted me with tears in their eyes. Finally feeling relieved, I clung to my grandmother and cried. To think that it really came to this. We were completely deceived. He always played the role of a good husband and father. My grandparents said this with regret, but I was fine because I already knew. Mom knew. That's why she did everything she could for me. My mother knew about my father's affair. Maybe she even knew that Sarah had approached me. My mother never mentioned such a thing to me. I wonder if she would have continued to play the role of a happy wife on the surface if she hadn't gotten sick. But when she learned about her illness, she must have made a decision. Thinking about what would happen to me after she was gone. She said she would do everything possible. One of those things was taking care of household chores. I had been helping my mother from a young age. And we started cooking together when I was in elementary school. She taught me her recipes, and I could make most of my mother's dishes. In the last year before she passed away, she taught me as much as she could. So even though my father wasn't coming home and I was living alone, I didn't struggle in that aspect. I could do laundry and cleaning. After my mother passed away and my father didn't return home, I took care of myself. It was all thanks to what my mother had taught me. Another thing my mother did started to show its effects after a while. A month after I left the home I was raised in, my father bombarded me with calls. I thought it would come to this, but ignored them. It wouldn't be fun if I answered right away. I turned off the volume of my smartphone, left it in my room when I went to school, and didn't touch it immediately when I got back. At night, after taking a bath and when it was almost time to sleep, I finally picked it up. There were 300 missed calls. My phone rang right in front of me. Even though the sound was off, the screen lit up to notify me. Maybe it's time. I silently answered the phone. Hello, Kristen? Why didn't you answer right away? Do you know how many times I called? I was immediately yelled at. How rude. I didn't respond. Hello, Kristen? Why aren't you answering? I remained silent. Kristen, it's Dad. You haven't forgotten my voice, have you? I wish I could forget, but unfortunately, I remember. Kristen, help me. I don't have a father, remember? After I said just that, my father was silent for a moment before continuing. It's Dad. I'm in real trouble, can you help me? You're not the kind of daughter to abandon your parents, are you? His coaxing voice was disgusting. As I said earlier, I don't have a father. Kristen. You must have the wrong number, please check again. I hung up and turned off my smartphone. That would likely be the last time I would hear the voice of the man who used to be my father. I plan to cancel this phone soon. Perhaps because I didn't answer his calls the next day. My father and Sarah came to my grandparents' house. Let me see Kristen. You must have influenced her. Send her back right now. That's right. A young and beautiful mom came to pick you up. So come back and live with us. Kristen, I'll forgive you now. Hand over the house. Then you can come back. Father and Sarah were kicked out of the house. Because I was the owner of the house. Before passing away, my mother transferred the deed and various other assets to my name. The house was a gift from my grandparents when my mother got married. As soon as she learned about her illness, she took action. She transferred the deed of the house to me. Of course, she paid the inheritance tax. But she didn't tell my father. So, my father thought he had rights to the house as the husband. He believed he was entitled to my mother's estate and panicked when he realized otherwise. I asked a lawyer, who was acting as my guardian, to send a certified letter to my father demanding he vacate the property. That's when he learned the truth and desperately contacted me. The letter stated he had to leave within a month or face a lawsuit. It also mentioned that all the furniture inside the house belonged to me, and that I would claim damages for any damages. Before leaving the house, I had taken photos of all the household items. I remembered the movers handling things quite roughly. Maybe Sarah also damaged something. Those high-quality, one-of-a-kind pieces made by craftsmen would cost quite a bit to repair. Hopefully, they weren't damaged. About 10 days after my certified letter arrived, I received a certified mail from my father. It contained a will, supposedly written by my mother, stating all her assets were to be left to my father. The letter demanded that my grandparents immediately hand over all of my mother's estate according to the will. It accused my grandparents of deceiving their precious granddaughter and destroying the father-daughter relationship. It demanded I be returned immediately. In response, we sent a counter-certified mail. Unfortunately, that will is invalid because there is a more recent will. Wills are prioritized by the date they were made. And the will my father had was dated shortly after my mother learned of her illness. In contrast, another will was made the day before my mother passed away. My mother had prepared a will in advance and, when the time came, added the date and handed it to the lawyer. There couldn't be a newer will than that. In my mother's shaky handwriting, I could feel her determination not to leave anything to my father. Her will stated, all of her estate would be left to Kristen. Kristen would be adopted by her grandfather, and her father would not be given custody. The arrangements for this were entrusted to the lawyer acting as Kristen's guardian. Most of my mother's estate was already in my name. But this was her way of stating that not even the last penny should go to my father. A few days after sending the second certified mail, a lawyer hired by my father contacted us. He said my father wanted to meet with me. Your father thinks there has been some misunderstanding. He can't understand why you suddenly left home and treated him this way. What happened? My father had told the lawyer that I had silently gone to my grandparents' house, making it impossible to contact me. He said he had visited my grandparents' house, but was threatened with police involvement and was refused a meeting. He suggested that maybe I was being held against my will by my grandparents. He was terribly worried. His daughter, me, is still a minor. As her biological parent, he couldn't accept that I would agree to being adopted by my grandfather without his permission. Maybe my grandparents had misled me, and I believed them. She's my precious only daughter left by my wife. Please, I beg you, help me get my daughter back. The lawyer said it was hard to watch my father speak so tearfully. He looked genuinely distressed. Your father said that since losing your mother, you might be a bit confused. He too lost the love of his life and couldn't provide the support you needed. He thinks that might be the reason. Even when my mother was alive, I wondered why he always seemed so theatrical. Maybe because he once aspired to be an actor. I remembered something. On her deathbed, my mother asked my father to take care of me. And he agreed, holding her hand. Even my grandparents, who were suspicious of my father, were moved to tears by that scene, which looked like something out of a drama. I watched coldly as my father held my mother's hand. I couldn't feel any warmth of love in that gesture. He's going to keep up the act till the end, isn't he? I said this and played a recording for the lawyer. It included everything from when the movers came to our house to when my grandparents visited. It revealed my father's true nature. The lawyer's expression changed upon hearing it. My father had always pretended to care deeply for me and my mother. But once my mother passed away and he brought Sarah into our home, his true colors were finally revealed. I had finally obtained evidence. This changes things. I'm sorry. The lawyer apologized and left. He later informed us that he had terminated his representation of my father due to the false pretenses under which he was hired and had charged him a penalty. After this, it's unlikely anyone will take your father's case. Exactly. No one would take his side if they knew the truth. Why did my father keep up this act, and why did my mother accept it? There was a reason. My father was my mother's first love. When she was in middle school, the same age I am now, she saw a play and became a fan of my father. At that time, my father was a member of a small theater group, aspiring to be an actor. My mother, engaging in what we'd now call fan activities, fell in love with him and they started dating. My grandparents, who disapproved of the relationship with my father, 8 years her senior and an unsuccessful actor, reluctantly allowed them to marry when my mother became pregnant with me right after graduating from college. One of the conditions was that they take my mother's surname. My mother was the only daughter of a company president. My father quit acting to work at a subsidiary of my grandfather's company after they married. Since then, my grandfather had always been wary of him. I never really trusted him. Yes, he always seemed a bit insincere. But seeing him at the hospital, I thought he truly loved Mama and Kristen. My father may not have succeeded as an actor, but he was very good at deceiving us. Even I would have continued to think of him as a wonderful father if I hadn't met Sarah. He's really good at acting. But then, how did Mom realize? As I wondered, my grandmother showed me a letter from my mother. It was entrusted to the lawyer to be given to my grandparents after her death. From early in their marriage, my mother began to feel distrustful of my father. Despite previously adoring him, she started to feel as if his behavior was deceitful after I was conceived. Perhaps it was maternal intuition. When she started investigating because of her suspicions, she found out my father had many other women. Given his good looks, many fans, like my mother, supported him financially. Yet, my mother tried to believe that out of all these people, he had chosen her. But she learned of him bragging to others. I snagged the president's only daughter. I'm set for life now. I don't really love her, but she's wealthy, so I'll take good care of her. My father had always seen my mother as nothing more than a source of money, even when she was just a fan. Learning this shocked her, but she hoped that having a child would bring happiness to their family. As she wrote in the letter, after my birth, my father appeared to be a very good father on the surface. Everyone was deceived, but my mother carried both the desire to believe and the inability to trust him, regularly investigating his surroundings. Then came Sarah's entrance. Sarah was a worker at a nightclub my father frequented. She became my father's mistress, believing he was the son and heir to a major company president. However, the truth was that my father was not the son of my grandfather, but his son-in-law. She came to me without knowing this, thinking if she could just get my mother out of the way, she could take her place. My father and Sarah eventually gave up and left that house. Even with the affair brought to light, my mother, who could have sued, was no longer there. They had nothing more to lose or pay. They seemed to be brazening it out, thinking that way. But I could sue them. I made sure they knew that. That day, Sarah came to see me at school. The act of a mistress maliciously interfering with custody. In simple terms, it means a mistress attempting to separate a child from their parent can be sued for damages. That day, Sarah threatened me to make my mother aware of her existence and pressured her to leave. I informed her that I would sue her for that action. Sarah denied doing such a thing, but a private investigator, who had been looking into Sarah, happened to catch that moment and recorded it as evidence. Sarah begged me not to sue, apologizing, but I showed no mercy. As a result of the lawsuit, Sarah's actions became widely known, and she was no longer able to work at the bar. Some people caused trouble, but apparently, the clientele dwindled significantly once they learned she had done such a thing to a child. The bar where my father met her was quite upscale. Such establishments value their reputation above all else, and can't afford to employ someone like Sarah. The bar fired Sarah. She threatened to sue me for defamation, but I told her to go ahead. Being sued by her would not trouble me at all. Instead, Sarah would likely face more difficulties. In the end, she did not sue and left the club. She probably won't be able to work in such a high-end place again. My lawsuit is still ongoing. Even if I win, I won't get much money, but that's not the point. I'm determined to see this through to the end and not let them escape justice. My father also became unable to stay at his company. He had gotten the job through my grandfather's connections, and had been posing as a potential successor because he was the son-in-law. But this incident revealed that I, his daughter, had kicked him out of the house and that he had had a mistress for years. It turns out he wasn't very competent at his job. Well, he could always make himself look capable, thanks to his acting skills, making him appear shrewd, but in reality, he was pretty much incompetent. Everyone came to realize this anew. With such acting skills, it's a wonder he didn't succeed as an actor. Perhaps the entertainment industry requires more than just talent. Maybe the stars have something my father lacked, an aura or presence. Anyway, his true nature being revealed led to a flood of pent-up frustrations from those around him. He became persona non grata everywhere, looked down upon not just by colleagues but also by business partners. His good looks, which had previously garnered him favorable attention from female employees, now earned him their scorn. He lingered at the company for a while but eventually left due to the unbearable atmosphere. He's now living in a small apartment with Sarah. He's reached out a few times asking for help, but we are strangers now. Moreover, strangers I detest. I have no obligation to help him. By the way, Sarah did damage my mother's dowry. When I claimed compensation for it, she must have realized further lawsuits would be troublesome and paid up fully. Maybe she used my father's severance pay or savings, or perhaps even took on debt. But that's none of my concern. I told them before, you're on your own. I've officially become my grandfather's adopted child. It's just a change in legal status without a change in name or anything else. However, I'll be going to school abroad from high school to prepare to take over my grandfather's role. Losing my mother was incredibly sad and lonely. I still cry when I remember her. But I can't cry forever. My mother must have known such a day would come. So she made sure I wouldn't struggle with language abroad by teaching me several languages. She really raised me to survive anywhere. I'm just starting to walk towards a bright future for myself. I want to absorb everything I can abroad, living up to my mother's expectations. And I'm determined to meet someone who truly loves me for who I am. In this regard, Mom was a negative example, wasn't she? As I said this, I felt as if the photo of my mother smiled back at me a bit sheepishly.